learn how to make a new document for our Imaginary Cities project. We're going to go over to Create New, and this will be the same on the iPad. Preset details, we're going to go ahead and say last name underscore imaginary city. And then I've already put this in earlier, but we want to make sure that we put in 11 inches and make sure that our units, our increments are set to inches. Our height is going to be 17 inches. And then your orientation can be either vertical or horizontal, depending on what you want to do with it. We don't need to change anything else. Our raster effects will change to 150 ppi, and then we'll go ahead and say create. So the first thing that you'll notice is that Illustrator looks a lot like Photoshop, but it functions a little bit differently. Um, Illustrator is a vector program, so we're going to be using shapes and vectors to draw our imaginary city that we'll be working with. The first thing that we want to do is we want to establish our color palette though. So if your swatches is not open, what we're going to do is go down to Window and go down to Swatches. And you'll see there's a box with all these different colors in it. And one of the first things that I do is I select the first one, which is a red one, and I'll hold down Shift and I'll hit delete. I'll go through and I'll hit the little trash can button. All of the swatches that you saw right there are pre-made ones that Illustrator kind of preloads into all documents. And a lot of times when students are learning Illustrator, they kind of pick those colors and it looks very, very much like you just opened Illustrator and started working in it. So I'll leave my gray ones because my gray ones will be good to include with my color schemes that I'm going to be working with. And so I just need to make sure that I have a swatch selected, and you can see there's a double box around it. The first color on top is going to be our fill color, and then this color right here is our stroke, and I'll show you in a little bit what the shape tool looks like with that. So right now I'm going to make sure that my white swatch is selected. I'm going to go down here and click on plus. And if your color mode is not set to CMYK, you'll notice that right next to color mode, there's a drop-down menu. So you'll see it might start off with RGB, it might start off with something else. We're going to go ahead and select CMYK. And go ahead and bring all those sliders over to the left-hand side. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start mixing my colors. And so here I'm going to add cyan and magenta to create a tint of purple. And you can see as I drag it over, it'll actually dynamically show me what that color will look like. So if I want to get close, a little bit closer more towards a purple, you can see I can start to add these. And right here, I've got a nice solid purple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start mixing my swatches. And so let's say that we are going to do two complementary colors. We'll pick, let's say purple, and we'll also pick orange. Those will be our two colors, and we'll say okay. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to maybe add some variations on that. So instead of just having that solid color the entire time, I might go ahead and make some shades. And what I'm doing is I'm just adding the K slider, and K stands for black. So I'll say okay. And all you have to do is just click on that little plus button, and that one swatch that you're working with will come up, and then you can add a new one based off of it. So all I'm doing right here is just adding more black to the color that I started with. And I'll say okay. I'm going to go back to my original one, and now I'm going to make some tints. And all I have to do for tints is just drag my slider in equal amounts back over where I'm taking that color back out of it. So I'm going to keep sliding, and you'll see that my color, as I'm adding less of the two colors, it'll make a light tint of it. So we'll go back this way. All right. So you should have, of the 2 or 3 colors that you're working with, a nice range of tints and shades to work with. My other color that I'm going to go through and make is we can make kind of a yellow orange. And so we'll bring this up. So now we'll go back in and we'll make orange by adding yellow and magenta together. And we can kind of keep moving it over until we get a nice orange that we like. And you can see right now I'm working with tints. And if I go right around here, I'll start to get a really nice intense orange. And so, you know, I'm really within that range of a nice, intense, saturated color. We'll go just a tiny bit farther. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start adding some black to it. So I'll have some shades that I can work with. So the first thing that you want to do when you make your project and start working with it is you want to make sure that you have all of your colors set up before you start. So this is the very first thing that you're going to do. And it takes maybe 5 minutes to go through and make your range. Um, and I'll go ahead and make a nice rich version of that. So you should have a nice range of tints or lighter shades of your color. You should have a nice range of your shades. And then also for the other color that you're going to work with, you want to go ahead and set those into your swatches. So the first thing that we want to think about is how we're going to arrange our elements within our document. So you'll notice that Illustrator is laid out in the same way that Photoshop is, but the tools and the arrangement of elements is going to work a little bit differently. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to bring up my layers palette. So I'm going to go down and you'll see layers is right here. And I've already kind of pulled it out so that you guys can see it as I'm working with it. So I'm going to bring my layers right here so that you can see it. The first layer that we're going to work with is our background layer. And I'm going to name my layers. And so you can double click on your layer and you'll be able to name it. I can go down here and I can add new layers. And so I'm actually going to go ahead and add 3 more layers. My second layer is going to be my city elements, and these are going to be my big ones. And then the next one's going to be more city elements, but these are going to be my small elements. And then my top one's going to be the atmosphere. So you have 4 layers that you're working on. As with Photoshop, you can lock your layers. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to work on my background layer and then I'm going to lock it. You'll see there's a little lock right there that you can click on. There are a couple things to remember. So I mentioned that Illustrator is a vector program. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need to make sure that we're using our tools appropriately. So it's not a raster image based program, which is something like Photoshop where we would work with images, where we would edit them in a certain way. In Illustrator, we're going to be just working with shapes and shapes drawn with points. And so the first tool that we're going to do, if we go down, a third of the way down is our different shape tools. And the first one we're going to do is the rectangle tool for our background. Now you'll notice up here, you'll see there's at least 3 different places that we can set our color. So I'm going to go ahead and set a color. You'll notice right now that right next to it where I have my option to change my stroke, there's a black. It's filled with black, and so I'll show you what that looks like. We don't want to have a stroke around that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here and we're going to say no stroke, and that'll get rid of it. Typically, you're not going to have a stroke around your shapes. So you've noticed I've drawn it out. It's a little bit too small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to my selection tool. Please be very careful not to click the white arrow. That'll do some different things to your shapes that we're not quite ready to do yet. So we always want to go back up to our black arrow. And now you can see I can click and I can drag to the edges of my shape. And so now I have a color for my background. So another thing that you might want to work with is the gradient tool. And so if the gradient isn't pulled up, you can go to Window and you can go down to Gradient and turn that on. What the gradient option is going to allow you to do is kind of create 2 colors that go together. So when you first open it, it has this generic white to black, and we always want to go in and change that and make it our own. We can make 2 points. So I'm going to drop a point right here, and all I did was just click right there, and you'll notice that it's filling it. And I'm going to double click. And when I double click, all of your swatches that you just made will show up. So I'm going to change one side of it. And then over here, I'm going to double click again and I'll change the other side of it. And then what's nice is within this function, I can change where my midpoint is. So I can actually change where that's happening. And I can actually change and add even more colors if I wanted to. So if I wanted to make this a little bit darker, a little bit more dramatic. Anytime you click right here, you can add another point to it. So if I wanted to kind of change how that's going to work. And if you ever drop a point that you don't like, you can go over to the trash can tool and just delete it and say, nope, just joking. I don't want to work with that. You can also change the angle. So right here, you can see it's going from left to right, and I actually want it to go up and down. So I can change my angle right here. You can also change the type of gradient that you're working with. You can go through and change it to a radial gradient. And then once again, you can kind of change where that's happening and what that looks like. I'll go back to this one. This one I need to go back and reset. The other tool that they also have is, if you go to the third option, is a freeform gradient. So on the freeform gradient, what that does is it allows you to drop points. And so what I'm going to do is, if you double click each one of the points, you can change the color for that. And then you can also move where that's happening. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to add my own points. And you definitely don't have to use this tool. If this is a little bit overwhelming or if this is too much, you are certainly welcome to not use this tool if you don't want to use it. So, but here, and then you can also see, as I click, you can also change how much there is of that point. You can drag it and you can readjust it. And so it might be that I want to kind of pull these and manipulate them in some different ways. So there's definitely the three types. So, and once you're happy with your gradient, what you can go ahead and do is you can go down here and say plus. Oops, hold on. You can go ahead and you can save it in some different ways. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. So if I go back here and I've got this kind of set up the way that I want it to, um, when I double click right here, it's going to have a little plus button and I can say new swatch. And it'll allow me to go through and kind of save it the way that I want to. So one of the things that you can think about as you're going through and as you're working is, what does this look like as you're kind of making changes and manipulations, and then you can kind of go from there. So there's quite a few different things that you can go through and you can work with in regards to your swatches.